Well, welcome back to this building of the DH82 Tiger Moth by Tony Ray. I'm 3 days in and boy can you tell, the workbench is already a mess. Anyway, what am I going to concentrate on today? Well, what I'm going to try and do is get the turtle decking in to the rear, the area of the front and rear cockpits done and the coaming here. Couple of things that I need to do. It isn't altogether clear from the photographs, unless you jump ahead a few, that you need to insert some blocks with these fishing swivels on them, and that's so that the supports, the wire supports that come through this upper decking to the cabin can be attached. There isn't any wood in the kit for these, so I found some hardwood from the scrap box, and I'd also epoxied this in at the bottom because I thought, well, it's an IC model, I don't need access for a battery. However, you do need access to get to do this and to attach the wires. There's no way around it. I've thought how I could do it, and really the only practical solution is that I've got access to this at least until the final stage of covering. So I've cut that back out again, much to Cliff Harvey's mirth. That's been removed again. I'm going to epoxy these blocks in. And another thing I'm going to do, these are the balsa pieces for the front of the fuselage. And you can see they've got holes in the bottom there to give you access to the holes and the blind nuts or the T-nuts for the cabin. But if you tighten those up into this, you're tightening into balsa, and soft balsa at that. And inevitably that will mean that they'll crush it at best, but also crush it and perhaps become slack. So what I'm going to do is cut this piece out and put a hardwood insert in here so that the cabin can be screwed up against that rather than this soft balsa. So a couple of epoxying jobs to do. The first one is to epoxy that piece in, and I can only really do one at a time. So I'm going to epoxy that in and then flip it over and epoxy the little block on the other side. I think I'm about prepared now to actually start gluing the turtle decking on. I've added some hardwood inserts from offcuts from the kit, and that will mean that when the cabin gets tightened up, it doesn't crush the balsa decking here. I think that's a sort of an oversight that needs to be corrected. It's been done both sides, so let's get them glued. And I think the best glue to use for this will actually be CA. You could use white glue, but that would mean that I'd be having to pin it or tie it or bind it, and that's only going to dig into the wood and so on. So I think the thing to do is to get the base glued in first on each piece, and when that's thoroughly set, I can bend it over, and I think I'm going to wet it slightly to help that curving process. So let's glue it on now. That's dried up, so I need to cut the tip. That's a good thing about these applicators. Is any glue left in that? Yeah, there. There you go. The glue flows once the okay. And you can see I've cut out the shape. This obviously had the holes pre-drilled through the balsa. That's that one. Double check I'm putting this on the right way. Fits in thusly. I'm putting glue along the top edge of the balsa side, but also this spruce reinforcement. I'm not gluing the edge yet, just getting it in position. Now, I've had a thought regarding this next part, and I'll share that with you once I'm happy that this is glued. Yeah, now, this is the side that has the cutout for the luggage bay. And what I need to do is obviously cut that out once it's in position, but before I do so, I'm going to cut this at least partially through, because it strikes me that it's, in fact I might cut it right the way through. It's unnecessary to have to cut through this and then hack through that in situ. So I'm going to actually transcribe it. I'll actually cut through here to make a mark on this and then saw it out. I think that's the way I'm going to do it. So I'll just move you around a little so I can get in. And that's in position. Now, this balsa feels a little bit tougher as well, so that'll definitely need to be wet. I could wet it before, I could have wet this beforehand. I could have wet this beforehand and then glued it on, but I think it'll be enough. And I could have even steamed it if I was unhappy. Let's see. Yeah. So I can see the line there. I can see the line there. And I'll just get the saw and I'll cut that out. Bear with me. As you can see, I've removed that piece now. I've mentioned, but I'll repeat it now. This former here, the instructions call for you to put it into position, then cut it out, then add this. Well, to me, that just doesn't make sense. If you're building this kit, put this part in, the F5A, after cutting this out nice and neatly and squaring it off, and it's perfectly adequate to do that. It seems a long-winded way to go about otherwise producing this area. So that's now cut out. That can be glued in position. I'll do that, and then you can pop back if you wish to do so. Once I've wet this and I've begun to curl it round. Here goes. I'm going to wet this balsa here, obviously just on the outside, and what it does obviously is it swells up the grains on the outer edge and loosens the binding between the fibres, and it'll allow this to take up a more curved shape. So leave that for a few seconds. Minute or so. Make sure I've got enough water on to make it work, and then we'll push it round. And once again, I'm going to use the CA to do that. Right, I found the brush, found the glue. We're going to apply the PVA. And actually I may use a CA like a tack. And I might just glue along this top edge with a CA. I think that might actually work better. Sometimes you just got to go with your gut feeling, and I think this is maybe a better approach. Okay, put the CA along the top edge. And then pull this over evenly. There we go. Now I'll have to trim this, because what happens, obviously when you add water to the balsa, it expands, so it's wider than it needs to be. So I'm going to trim off some of this so that I've got enough for the other side to wrap around. Just remove this. There you go, and that allows the other side to wrap over nicely. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing with this section and the rear section, and then we'll see what it looks like once it's all curled over. I've started to apply the moisture with a brush. It's a lot more efficient than an old rag, so put that on, make it nice and wet, and then you'll find it conforms nicely to shape. That's much better. Now this one appears to have gone short. It's no matter, it'll glue to this, but not sure why that's happened, but we'll deal with that in a second. Right, I'm going to CA this now, chopping and changing glues, because I want it to be a good hit on here. And switching back to the white glue here, plenty of it. I can get into it nice and easily. If it was inaccessible, a good way to apply a curved deck like this, for example on a wing sheeting, is to put the glue on first, let it dry, and then iron through. Used it before, it works really well. I was a bit dubious as to whether it would work, but it does. It works very well. My thought initially was that the balsa would act as too much of a insulator to allow the heat from the iron to reactivate the glue, but no, it does work very well indeed. So if you ever have that situation, it's a good solution. There we go. It's gone round really nice, rather nicely. Pleased with that. Now this balsa was a little bit stiffer, so it'll need, in fact I might even apply some steam along here to aid it going round, because this balsa is a little bit tougher and I don't want to split it or break it. So I'm adding a bit more water and then I'll add steam from the kettle. I know it's not a kitchen item that you see very often in American homes, but it's an invaluable tool. If I take the lid off, it doesn't turn off. So I'm going to steam up and apply a bit more heat. Can't do this with two hands, so you'll have to bear with me. Back from the kettle, and I think you can see that that massively helps in the flexibility of the balsa. So I'll get this glued on now. Once again, a combination of white glue and CA to hold it in position. I'm going to put white glue all the way along this stringer. And I'm going to add PVA to the final top stringer to lock everything into position where I want it. And that's one side completed. Water, a little bit of steam for this rear part. PVA, CA does the job. Pleased with that. That's the decking done. I think definitely CA is the way to go for this. I'm going to cut out these doors and the luggage hatch. However, I'm going to actually deviate from the instructions somewhat in that I'm not going to actually fit the aluminium hatches yet, or the doors. And that's because I think it'll be easier to actually install them after covering. So, that being the case, I can still remove them, and they've been partially lasered so that you simply have to cut them through. But before I do that, a little side note. The cowl here, you can see, looks rather splendid. I don't know if you can make it out, but this whole section here broke off. And it broke off because I tried to push it onto the fuselage just to check it out. And it's a little bit brittle. Well, it's a lot brittle. I was unaware of that and I thought, well, that's it, scrapped. However, it glued together with thick CA and a kicker, and it's glued together really well, because I've discovered that what you really need to do with this cowl is heat it with a paint stripper, and that makes it malleable and you can push it on and form the shape and pull it out and so on. I should have done that initially, and if I'd done that, it wouldn't have broke. Perhaps a sheet explaining how to prep this would be useful. All's not lost. I think I might reinforce the interior with some fiberglass matting. However, I do believe that these cowls are no longer included in the kit, and a slightly different design is included. But for those of you who've got them, just beware that in its current state, it can be quite brittle. So let's take it off. Warning out of the way. No major damage done. That's it there. And you can see it just, and I'll actually use some body filler and blend that out. You'll never see it. It is rather nicely detailed. It'd be a shame if I'd made more of a mess of it than that. Right, let's get this cut out. It should just be a case of following the line. Which I'm obviously doing here. Remove. I'll remove all the others, And then, as I say, I'm going to put them to one side, and I'm not actually going to do the hinge doors. Well, I may do them, but I'm not going to fit them until after the covering's been done. Let's get this done. Well, that looks a little bit different, doesn't it? So, lots of cavernous space there. What do I do next? Well, I'm awaiting the arrival of a mount for the engine. So I don't really want to go ahead with making the front section and getting that propped up. That's this one here with a block on it. What I may do, actually, seems a little bit off field, but what I may do is put together the interior, and the reason for that is I want to make sure that the mechanism that I need to install for operating the control surfaces isn't fouled and doesn't get in the way of the interior. So a slight departure from the plans, I may do that next. There's a piece that runs down here to bring the covering out and back in again. I can see the photographs of it, but I can't see any reference to the parts. So I'll have to have a little bit of a study of that, and maybe that's what I do with a computer in front of me and a tipple in my hand. So for now, I think I'm going to just leave it at that. And yeah, it's looking nice. Gives it some character, that cowling. The turtle deck rather. Cowling I can sort out, a little bit of a shock with that, but we're getting there.